Good evening and welcome to Project Tanakh's YouTube channel. We are now beginning to study the Book of Yechezkel, the Book of Ezekiel, which is one of the most fascinating books of the prophets. In the beginning of the book, his very first vision is a vision of the godly chariot, which is known as Maseh Merkava. The story, the details of God's divine chariot. Now, no one should misunderstand and think that this is referring to physical objects. It's purely spiritual things, godly ideas, which are being couched in terms which mere mortals such as us are able to understand. Actually, the Talmud, in the Book of Chagiga, the sages say that the story of the Merkav, of the chariot, which is not allowed to be taught in a group, in other words, for example, on a YouTube video, it's not allowed to be taught to any more than one person, and that one person has to be someone who's able to catch on his own and doesn't need to be explained all of the details. So one may ask, what are we doing here studying something that the Talmud specifies not to study? I was hoping you'd ask that. The answer to the question is quite simple. The Talmud is not referring to this chapter because this chapter, first of all, most of us don't really truly understand all of the steps, all of the different spiritual levels behind everything that is being discussed. But the whole meaning there in the Talmud of the chariot, of the godly chariot, it means slightly different things according to different commentators and different codifiers of Jewish law, but this is not what it means. What it means is something along the lines of the mysteries of the Torah, the hidden parts of the Torah, those parts of the Torah that are explained on a mystical, Kabbalistic level, which is partially what we are doing here, but the things have changed since the time of the Talmud. The closer we get to the time of the complete and true redemption through our righteous Messiah, through Mashiach, the more important it is for us to know what's going on beyond the veil, what's going on beyond the scenes. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, the commentaries of Ezekiel are filled with explanations of what the text there means. The only thing is that the same thing can be explained on many different levels. It's the case with a parable, with an allegory. A teacher will use a story to explain a difficult concept to a child. Hidden within this story is the concept which the teacher wishes to give over. The same thing is true of us. We are God Almighty's children. He's teaching us exceedingly deep concepts. So he's using allegorical, physical terms, anthropomorphic terms, in order that we should have a chance of grasping something, some small part of what is being expressed. And beyond that, we will, when the time comes, we will understand it fully. As a matter of fact, the sages have said that the Torah, which will be taught to us by the Messiah, our Torah, which we currently study, is considered as hevel, as air, as nothingness in relation to the Torah which the Messiah will teach. But at the same time, the Torah was only given once. Moses went up on Mount Sinai and received the Torah for all Jewish people for all generations. The question is how we approach it, how we look at it, because there's layer upon layer upon layer of meaning and shades of meaning within every single letter of the Torah. The book of Yechezkel, of Ezekiel, especially the first chapter, no less or more so than anything else. It's just that it's something that's very, very deep and will take quite a bit of understanding and quite a bit of explaining on my part. So we both have our jobs to do. Each of us has our own job. In the beginning of the chapter, Ezekiel, Yechezkel, is identified as Yechezkel ben Buzi, that Yechezkel, Ezekiel, the son of Buzi. Actually, though, the Targum Yerushalmi, which is a translation of the prophets into Aramaic, which also includes quite a bit of explanation, says that his father was the prophet Jeremiah. Why was he called Buzi? Because Buzi is from the word bezoyin, disgrace. We were disgraced because during this period of time we were exiled from Jerusalem, from Israel, from our home, and our holy temple. The first temple was destroyed. Now, Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, the father of Ezekiel, prophesies in the land of Israel, while his son Ezekiel, for the most part, related his prophecies in Babylonia, in our exile. The fact is that the exile to Babylonia and the destruction of the first temple took place in stages. Stage number one was the Babylonians took away from Israel the cream of the crop, the best of the best of the Jews. He took, for example, Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his three friends, for the purpose of training them to be able to serve Nebuchadnezzar in his palace. Because of their great wisdom and talent, he took Yechezkel, he took Mordechai. These people were exiled, but the actual complete exile of the Jewish people from Israel did not take place for another 11 years. It was 11 years later that the rest of the Jews were sent out of Israel and our holy temple was destroyed. As a matter of fact, when Jeremiah, the father, Yirmiyahu, was present at the time of the destruction of the temple, using a sort of wireless connection, Ezekiel was in the land of Babylonia describing exactly what was happening via prophecy. We will begin in the next class starting from the beginning of the chapter. There's just one other point that I'd like to clear up first, and that's the fact that generally prophecy must be given in the land of Israel. It's the Holy Land. That's the place where God appears to prophets. So how is it possible? Many of the commentators ask, how is it possible that Ezekiel was able to relate prophecies that he received from God outside of the land of Israel? Most of the commentators explain that the very first prophecy which he received was within the land of Israel. There's some disagreement as to which chapter it is. We know that within the books of the prophets and the books of the 5 books, within the 5 books of Moses, within all of our holy books, despite the fact that one may think that they're history books, they're not. They do tell us a great deal of history, but at the same time, that's not the purpose that they serve at all. The purpose that they serve is merely to be used in order to teach us lessons which we need to live by for all times. And as I've said in the past, that's our owner's manual. So the chronological order is not always followed. This first prophecy, chapter 1, which is the vision of the great divine godly chariot, was actually not his first prophecy. His first prophecy was either chapter 14. There are several different opinions what the first prophecy was, but the first prophecy was heard in the land of Israel, and therefore he was allowed to continue. However, he did not write his own book because he was outside of Israel, and all of the books of the biblical canon had to be written within the land of Israel, and therefore all of his prophecies were written down by the men of the Great Assembly. Shortly we shall continue with the beginning of the first chapter, and I look forward to it. Good evening.